Raising the Banner is back for year number 2. The 2019-2020 season is upon us already. Don Tottingham along with Garrett Kaloje, both of us 3-time MAB award winners. Garrett, welcome back to the show.
Don, it's been far too long, I think. You and I have been on air. I think we need to make a concerted effort to get back on a more frequent basis. It's a new season. There's a lot of optimism. Maybe unless you're an Ottawa Senators fan, maybe there's just pain and misery and booze. But aside from that, it's things seem to always be at a new height. There's always a new excitement this time of year, and I think I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to what is to come.
Well, Garrett, a big time off season this year. I think in terms of what we have for the Red Wings, and kind of recapping this thing here, you had Nicholas Cronwell, who decided to hang up the skates back in August. So not really a surprise in some aspects, but and then you had some key additions that we're going to get into here shortly that the Wings made during the off season. Then we're going to look into some of the key departures from the off season. We'll take a look at the 2019-2020 opening night roster, which there's some surprises in that, I think. And then we're going to have a quick discussion on captain or no captain with the Red Wings here. Ooh, yeah. And then a quick rundown of the Eastern Conference, kind of what's going on with the teams that we're going to see the most this year. What were some of the moves that were made? Who's the better teams to look out for? Is there any better teams? Did somebody overspend this summer? Did some teams not spend enough? What can we expect as as fans of the Eastern Conference? And then last but not least, and this is where I hold your feet to the fire, we're going to do our predictions for this year. So last year we did pretty darn good. And then in fact, even when we got to the Stanley Cup playoffs, when we had the what do you want to call it there? When we had our predictions for the playoffs, we did really, really well with our predictions once we got to the playoffs. So, we're going to hold you to everything there once we get to the predictions in tonight. So, without any further ado, I think let's get started here with the Red Wings, Garrett. And coming into this season, as I mentioned, Nicholas Cronwell retiring. Did you really think that was a surprise at all?
I think it was inevitable. Let me just go off by saying, let me just go on by saying I think it's sad. It's bittersweet in a way to see a guy like Nick Cronwell retire.
For sure.
I think we all knew it was going to happen. I'm glad that he was able to play well this last half of this last season to at least make it look like and leave a more positive image of him with the recency bias with some of the fans, which is fine. I'm okay with that. He had a heck of a career here in Detroit, and obviously he's nowhere close to being a Hall of Fame caliber player. He was a heck of a two-way player, he was also more of an old school player too, played maybe more of a physical style game. Maybe wasn't necessarily the best shooter out there, but was very smart, could beat you with his body, could play that very dependable minute every night, could play against the best team's player. He was more conventional, older hockey type player. And I think that was something that the team needed last year as they were kind of going through this transition. And now obviously Steve Yzerman's here as the GM, which we're going to get into at some point. I think that it was inevitable. Some people thought it would have happened last year. I think I just wish it would have been during the season so fans could have come out and maybe shown Cronwell their respect is all I would have wanted.
Yeah, it almost seems as if Cronwell isn't the type of player that wants that kind of serenade, if you will. That was never really his MO. So that being the case, I just, I think if he could have went out and actually played, perhaps, but I think he knew deep down that he couldn't bring anything to this roster going into the season. that they already didn't have, And the game, you could tell, has kind of passed him by quite a bit. I know he had some nagging knee injuries the last couple of years, which didn't allow him to play as much. So that being the case, I think he said, you know what, it's time to let some of these other guys kind of step in here and do their thing and kind of take over. So, that being said, I'm not saying he was ushered out, but I think it was like, okay, Karan, it's time for you to step aside. Let some of these younger players come in and play. So that's why I think you're not going to see. Not that he didn't deserve it, but he wasn't the type of player that liked the accolades, and so I think I think really honestly, and we'll never know the answer to this, obviously, but I think the organization kind of left it up to him, and that's just how the Red Wings are. And you've seen that with other players, right? Like even like Henrik Zetterberg, same kind of deal. He didn't go out with a retirement plan, if you will, and getting rocking chairs and posters and everything like that from other teams. It was just July came around, he knew he couldn't go. He even said in that offseason, he goes, if I know at training camp I can go, I'll be back out there. But you knew as well as I did that that wasn't the case. He was done. So after that season. So that being the case, I just don't think it's his MO to get that proper send off, if you will. I don't think that's in his cards. But anyway, but no, I mean Cronwell had a hell of a career here in Detroit. Let's be honest, and it's unfortunate. I thought the way that he played, the physicality that he brought on the defensive end, where you always had to keep your head up. Everyone knows about the Cronwalls, right? I don't think I have to bring that up to anybody on this, any of our fans here. Everyone's real familiar with that. And the way he played the game really kind of helped revolutionize some of the rules that are in the game right now with concussions, right? I mean, everyone's going to remember the hit he had on Marty Havlat, right? In the, 2008 Stanley Cup playoffs with the Blackhawks? I mean, he knocked him flat out. And that was the beginning of the Cronwall, right? So 11 years later, here he is hanging up the skates. So the way he played the game, I think, was the beginning of a revolution, if you will, for player safety. So, and maybe he won't even take that as a feather in his cap, but I'll never forget the hit he had. I don't even remember who the player was. It may have been Tyler Johnson, I think it was, of Tampa Bay, in the 2013 or 2014 playoffs. I think it was a game 6 where he got the match penalty for that hit, and then was. I'm sorry, you're right. It was Kucherov. You're right. It was on Kucherov, and then Cromwell was suspended for Game 7, which I thought was absolutely ludicrous. But that's what I'm talking about. That is kind of like the beginning of this revolutionary player safety kind of thing, and I think that's why Cronwall's game suffered substantially with how he could play the game, because he couldn't play as physical as he used to early on. So that being the case, I think it took a lot of his play away, if you will. He had to kind of revamp his game, and let's face it, it's a young man's game now, right? So he just didn't fit into that. Yeah, he didn't fit into that anymore, and he was relatively a smaller defenseman. He wasn't Chris Pronger, let's be honest here. So he had to use every ounce that he had. And unfortunately, it was catching guys with their head down at the blue line. So,
and you could tell at certain points last season he was a smart player.
Yeah,
you could tell he's always been a very smart player. His body just wasn't able, and his feet weren't able to catch up to the players of today. Mm-hmm. And it was unfortunate to have to see how fast and how quickly he kind of, I'm not going to say fell apart, but how quickly he took Cronwall from being a, still respectable player, confident player to, okay, this guy's a liability.
Yeah. So now let's, moving forward here into the 2019-2020 season. It sounds so weird saying that. It has now been, this will be the 11th year that the Wings have gone without a cup. And I know I'm putting the cart before the horse here, but bear with me here. So last year the Red Wings finished.
Probably going to end up that.
There's going to be a few more years in between, but yeah. So last year the Wings finished 32-40-10, 74 points. That was good enough for 7th in the division, 28th overall. 21st in offense, basically 2.73 goals per game. Defensively, they were 27th, allowing 3.32 goals against average. The power play was good at the beginning, but I think it kind of tailed off at the end at 18.1%, which is about in the middle of the road, 19th. The problem you had, though, Garrett, last year was the penalty kill. The PK was abysmal. 28th in the league at 77.1%. Just terrible. So, you know, those are certain things I think that I think are going to be addressed early on with this team because those are glaring issues right there. And of course, as you all know, on April 19th, Steve Yzerman is now your new general manager. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. Jeff Blashill is still your head coach. And so moving forward, some changes made with the team. So you're going to say goodbye to players such as Thomas Vanek, who has moved on. And so has Luke Witkowski, which is unfortunate because I liked Luke. But again, you knew that at some point that had to come to a close, right? And then Marty Firk is gone. And this is Wade Megan and Luber Sulik. So those are the four departures. Now, you have some new arrivals this year with the offseason. And some of you might remember Valtteri Filppula. He comes over from Tampa Bay. I'm sorry, from the New York Islanders. My apologies. He was in Tampa Bay. Patrick Nemeth, Oliver Koski, and Calvin Pickard. So those are four new players that have come on via free agency.
And so, Don, before I hate to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good.
I will give you. I remember that. I remember sitting here on Facebook Live, and thank you all for joining us. By the way,
yes,
on Facebook Live,
absolutely
appreciated nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're roll this thing to a level that we can get to semi-regular episodes, and I think that we're putting ourselves in that position to do so. I will give you credit, Don.
Yes.
We recorded something about a week. It was the week between the draft and the week before the agency.
Yeah.
So it was about that 10 days before. And I'll give you credit, man. You nailed the Valtteri Filppula planning. I was totally against it. I thought it made no sense. You called it. Bravo.
Well, here's the thing. But it makes sense, though. Even though you say it doesn't make sense, it makes total sense because Filppula used to play here. He's good friends with Steve Yzerman. He played, obviously, with Steve Yzerman in Tampa Bay. Steve knows exactly what Valtteri Filppula brings to this team. Now, is Flipper going to be here in 5 years? Probably not. But the difference is here, though, is Filppula can bring the type of play that Steve Yzerman wants, and that's why that makes total sense to me. That's why it made sense that that he was here. That they brought him in. That's why I thought they were going to go that route. It had nothing to do with what he did on Long Island. It had nothing to do. Well, actually, I guess it's in Brooklyn now, which technically is Long Island. But anyway, it has nothing to do with any of that. I think it has to do with the type of player he is, the type of caliber he is. And you know what he's going to help, Garrett? That 19th power play. That's what he's going to help with. And I think that's where the team struggled a little bit. He's going to help with that. On the PK, probably not so much, but definitely on the power play. So, and I think those are two of the things that you're going to see that Yzerman's going to address right away with this team is your special teams. So, because let's face it, this team left a lot to be desired. And they simply didn't create enough, I thought, on the power play chances they had. Let me see here. They had something where they went to the man advantage just 216 times last year, which was 28th in the league. I mean, that's just not skating in certain facets. I mean, that's just not effort, right? So Flipper brings effort, right? That was one of the reasons why Mike Babcock liked him so much was because of his compete level. So to me, that's why I went with that route. I thought it was going to be a low salary requirement deal. It wasn't going to cost him a lot. It just made sense. So that's right. Considering who was out there.
You deserve the credit.
Well, I mean, I'll take it because I'm usually wrong on those. So, yeah. So now, Garrett, with those departures, now this offseason, I know I have some, a lot of friends at the office love this show, and they're excited for the season, and they're excited to see the young players. I'm like, guys, you need to pump the brakes here a little bit. I said, here's the deal: you're not going to see the young players right off the bat this year, and some of them are asking, well, why not? That's what we want to see. We want to see the young players. I'm like, look, there's too much. And you give this, I have to give you credit here where credit's due, since we're handing out awards. You had mentioned earlier, and you and I talk a lot off this show. And you had mentioned on kind of how Kenny Holland, and you use the reference of like a kitchen, if you will, as a chef. That Ken Holland was a chef that's moving on to a different kitchen in Edmonton, but what he did, he didn't just take all the ingredients and leave. What he did is he kind of restocked the shelves, if you will, and he kind of had it on 3 levels, right? So your top level is your, I don't know if you want to call it your core players or your young core players that you want to build around up there in your draft picks and that kind of stuff, and the Rasmussens, and the Anthony Cus, if you will, maybe even the Anthony Manthas, the Zadinas, Joey Velenos. Those kind of guys are up there on your top shelf, and then you have your middle shelf guys, right? So the guys aren't really not going to go anywhere for the most part. And then you have like your third level. So this is kind of like the level where you're like, I need to kind of check the expiration date on these ingredients, and some of these might be spoiled. So you kind of did this thing here, and that being the case, when we look at what I was trying to explain to everybody was, look, you're not going to use the goods that have a longer expiration date before you start using up the goods that need to be used immediately, correct? It's just like checking the dates it's just like checking the dates when you go to the grocery store. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to be home next week, so I probably should go get the milk that's probably 2 weeks out instead of a week out, right? So I think that's what Steve Yzerman is going to do here. So before you just get all excited and expect to see all the youngsters out there in the starting lineup for the season opener on November 5th against Nashville in Nashville, it's not going to happen that way. And let me explain why. I think Steve Yzerman, and I have no source on this, this is just me being me. I think he's going to try to get rid of as much of the almost expired ingredients as he can. Meaning there's going to be a trade somewhere. And it's not going to be a blockbuster, guys. We're not going to land Sidney Crosby, okay? We are going to perhaps try to get rid of some of the contractual issues that we have. We're going to try to get rid of some of the players that may not fit into what Steve Yzerman wants. And that's why you saw a lot of the things you saw during the preseason. Is I think the organization was trying to get a general feel of exactly what they have. And I think the organization, if you will, for the scenario that I just used, was trying to figure out exactly what the expiration dates were on the players that would be on the third tier of that cabinet. So, Garrett, with that being said, would you agree or disagree with kind of the way I laid that out?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. Your friends are right to want to have some excitement, and I think when you've gone close to, I'm going to say, Don, 6 years of really non-competitive hockey here.
Sure.
You get an itch of wanting to see young kids, and rightfully so.
Yep.
But I think that there are other things that Yzerman knows, that a lot of guys know who've been in the business, that you honor contracts, and the Wings are getting out of this kind of cap hell, I guess, if you want to call it, after the season, or at least getting rid of a majority of it after the season. Ken Holland kind of knew the writing was on the wall, and I bet you if you kind of talk to him when he's fully out of hockey, when he's done with the Oilers, when he's done doing these things, he'll probably admit to you that he was a little too loyal at fault for certain guys. And we could talk about this for 2 hours.
Sure.
If we wanted to.
Yeah.
We're not going to.
No.
But I think that Yzerman is going to use, especially this first month or two, I would imagine he would use this first month or two as an evaluation period to see what guys that are close to that expiration date, if we're using it in keeping the reference here of my chef and the sous chef thing, and if we're going to use that, these guys are close to the expiration date and seeing what he can do with them to get something out of it.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm using this first 2 months of the season for.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that I think it's going to be very unlikely that a Jonathan Erickson comes back or a Trevor Daley comes back. Maybe Erickson might just get that Crown Wall treatment just because he's been here for so long. I know a lot of fans don't seem to like him, but he's still been a valuable member of this team for years.
Yep.
He'll still probably try and do what's best for him and best for Darren Howell maybe or Luke Glendening overall after the season in collective deals. So, he's got some options, but I don't think that you can just play all these kids and expect them to be good. I think that the way that the roster's crafted, and we'll get into the roster in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I think that there are certain guys who, if you put them in certain roles, I don't think would have made sense.
Agreed.
And I think that if you would have put, it's exciting to see all these young kids. And it's exciting that for the first time ever in Detroit minor league history, that 5 first-round draft picks are playing out with the Grand Rapids Griffins. I mean, that's really incredible when you think about it.
Yeah.
But that's all, those 5 draft picks, it's not like they're going to be bad. I think all 5 of them will be up by the end of the season, if not at the end of next season, up at Detroit. And those expiration dates, guess what, guys? They're coming up.
That's right.
For a lot of this team and for a lot of these guys that people want to see gone. So I think that is very, I think that's the encouraging thing about this year is that the pain that you're going to have to suffer this year is going to solidify or going, basically you'll get rid of those ingredients that you've been wanting to get rid of for the longest time. And now you'll finally be able to cook that nice prime steak.
There you go.
With the nice sauce.
That's right.
And with the nice condiments on the side.
Absolutely. And, the thing is again, you're going to have to eat the beef stew right now to be able to save up for that, as you mentioned, that prime rib later on down the line. So without any further ado, and I want you guys to hold on to this this thing of the kitchen in the cupboard. We're going to put this aside for just a second. We're going to go over the opening night roster, but I want you to put the kitchen thing off to the side because we're going to get back into it here in a few minutes when we talk about captain or no captain, and you'll see why when we bring this up. So, Garrett, now moving on to the 2019-2020 opening night roster, which, by the way, the season opens up October 5th in Nashville, and then the home opener is the following day in Detroit against the Dallas Stars. So here's your opening night roster. You have Justin Abdelkader, who, take it or leave it. I mean, he's not my favorite player. There's no question about it. I've been pretty damn vocal about that. But he does bring some, let's face it, he wasn't going to get cut, right? And he wasn't going to get bought out. So He does bring some toughness to the lineup. He brings a veteran experience. Again, he is what he is. Followed by Anthony Mantha, Luke Glendening, Darren Helm, Chase Pearson, Valtteri Filppula, Tyler Bertuzzi, Jacob Delarose, Taro Hiroshi, Christopher N., Dylan Larkin, Andreas Athanasiou, Adam Ernie, and Franz Nielsen. So those are your 14 forwards. On defense, you have 9 of them. Jared McIsaac, which really surprised me. Philip Hronek, Dennis Cholowski, Patrick Nemeth, Mike Green, Jonathan Erickson, but I think Erickson's going to be on IR to start the season, by the way. Danny DeKeyser, Madison Bowie, and Trevor Daley. So those are your 9 defensemen. So I think the reason you probably have Nemeth and McIsaac up is because Erickson's not going to play, is my opinion. I still think Madison Bowie probably fills that spot.
I did want to clarify 2 things, Don.
Yep.
McIsaac will start the year on long-term injured reserve.
He is. Okay.
He got injured in the offseason, had surgery. Basically, for right now, up until essentially the rosters are due tomorrow. Any junior players that are injured have to remain on the lineup until Tuesday, and they just send them down. The contracts don't count against them. So Pearson and McIsaac are both hurt. but won't be on the opening night roster. But for right now, it's some sort of contractual obligation.
Interesting. I did
built
not
into
know
the
that.
CBA, and I'm not familiar with that.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. So that's why you're a book of knowledge. And then moving into your goaltenders, really no surprise here: Jimmy Howard, Jonathan Bernier. So that's your opening night roster. So I think a lot of people are going to ask the question, well, what the heck? Where's Rasmussen at? Where's Zadina at? Where are these other guys at? Exactly. They're on the top shelf, guys. They're on the top shelf. That's where they're at. So get used to it. These guys are going to start down in Grand Rapids. This is where they need to start. Because the last damn thing you want is to have these guys start opening night and go 2 or 3 weeks without scoring a damn point. That's the worst thing this team could have right now. You need to have these guys come up. You need to have them confident. And we're going to get into something a little bit later of the captain, no captain, and work ethics. And you'll see why we're bringing this up. And this is why these guys didn't make the roster. But we're going to get into that a little bit later on. But Garrett, I want your opinion, or if there's any surprises that you saw with this opening night roster.
I'm happy. There's a few things I took away. I think I'm happy with the fact that Chalowski won a spot. I don't think his spot was up in danger.
No,
I think
that
he did have to work a little bit for it. I think he did have to work a little bit for it, but I do think that he did show up. He treated it like he was a professional and won the spot. I don't think it was up there. I am actually happy too to see that there seems like there is a nice glut of center depth as well too.
Yeah,
I know as much as they didn't want Filppula, it's nice to have Filppula who can play both the wing, play center. You'll have Athens who can play both wing and center.
Yep.
And both those guys complement pretty well.
Correct.
And I think the third thing that I like to see is that there's still a little bit of a youth movement, but it's very subtle.
Yes.
And this is a very big tryout year.
Yep.
Adam Ernie is a very underrated move that I think not a lot of people know who Adam Ernie is.
Mm-hmm.
I think he'll be a solid third line player for this team. I think he'll be a very quality player for this team on that third line playing the wing. Mm-hmm. Taro Hiroshi's playing for his life, in my opinion. And I think Hiroshi is actually a guy that I would look to this year as being maybe a kind of breakout candidate. Yes, last year he had 7 points in 10 games and, looked fine in the games that he played against, but he didn't look like a player. And from what I've heard from guys like Larkin and Mantha and Double A and from Blashill and Eiserman and people who are in the organization, it seems like Taro Hiroshi took the chance this offseason to really take himself to the next step and take himself to the next physical and mental step to being a regular NHL player. So I think that's the one thing I'm happiest most about. I think the downside, I would probably have liked to have seen a few more kids on the roster. Seider was really pushing for a chance to go there. And I know that it's difficult for an 18-year-old kid to come from Germany to Detroit and do that. But it's still impressive nonetheless that he made it that difficult for the Wings brass to do that. When, let's be honest here, most people the day before the draft probably didn't know who Mo Seider was if he was walking down the street.
That's exactly right.
So
you'd have thought he was the coffee guy,
Yeah, I mean, he would have just probably thought he's some random, dude from Germany.
Yeah.
And I was also a little disappointed that I think Foligno didn't get a chance because I think that, Filppula potentially took Foligno's spot. But again, it's all the process and it's all this maturity. It's all this this thing that we'll talk about here down the road. And I think that the roster is what it is. They're not going to be very good this year. I think that this is a very big year for a lot of these guys to prove it. And it's a very telling year. There's going to be a lot of moving pieces. I think the roster that you see here at the start of the year will be nowhere close to what you see in December. No. It definitely will not be close to anywhere what it is now when the trade deadline comes in February. So I think that what you see here is just the beginning, really.
So just about a week ago now, well, it's probably been about 3 or 4 days. There was a rumor out there that the Wings were looking to make a trade for Kyle Connor with the Winnipeg Jets. And what supposedly was rumored that the Red Wings were going to give up was Madison Bowie and Andreas Athanasiou and a first-round draft pick in 2021 for Kyle Connor, because Kyle Connor at that time was an RFA with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, since then, he's been re-signed to a 7-year, $50 million deal. That's off. That obviously that trade is off if it was even out there. My point to you is going back to what I said earlier about taking the expired or close to expired product that's in your cabinet and using it immediately. That is exactly what Steve Yzerman is doing with this roster. This is why you see some of these players up here right now. I'm telling you right now, of the 14 forwards that you see in this lineup right now, that being Luke Glendening, that being maybe even De La Rose is probably one of them. Adam Ernie, maybe even Franz Nielsen, Anthony Sio. Maybe not so much Franz Nielsen because of his PK. And even some guys on defense. Danny DeKeyser, Madison Bowie, maybe even Trevor Daley. Maybe even Mike Green. It's hard to say. I think what you're going to see is some moves made with any one of those players. Darren Helm, for example. You're going to see those guys on the trading block a lot coming up here in the first quarter of the season. And I think the reason is because what they're trying to do is build up the draft picks to let these young guys come in and play at this point. And that gives them a quarter of a season down in Grand Rapids to sharpen their skills, get a little confidence, as you said, and then come up and play big boy hockey. And I think that's exactly what this Red Wings team is trying to do, is they're trying to shuffle off and get something for these guys that, as you know, Garrett, is going to fall off the books at the end of this year. Guys like Darren Helm, guys like that are going to fall off the books.
Daly and Mike Green.
There you go. So, right. So do you try to get something for him right now? Because, the thing is, once you get close to the trade deadline, as you mentioned, it's much more difficult to get anything in return for some of these guys because the price goes up so damn high. So, yeah, we might get an extra draft pick by waiting up that far, but does it really do us anything long term? I don't know. So I would be surprised if Steve Yzerman and company wait until the trade deadline to make some moves. I would really be surprised by that. I think you're going to see one or two moves here early on to kind of clean up some of the. I don't want to. Sounds going to sound bad, but some of the spoiled product that you have in your cabinet. You know what? Take it to the farmer's market, see what you can get for it, kind of thing. You know what I mean? What do you have to lose? And what can you get in return? Can you get something else you can put back up on the top shelf and wait another couple months? I think that's really what he's trying to do, and really build it from there. And that's. I think what the organization is trying to do is go back to kind of what the Blackhawks did in 2006, 2007, get that core built up and then build it out. And I think they have that. I just think they need to have some players that kind of fill in and plug in some spots where they just don't have it yet. And I think there's a couple players right now on this roster that are expendable. And Andreas Athanasiou is one of them. And I think Danny DeKeyser might be the other one on defense. So I expect one of those two to be moved here relatively soon. I don't think Athanasiou's work ethic, I don't think his play is what Steve Yzerman wants in this team. So I think him and Danny DeKeyser are probably two of the spoiled type players, if you will, on this roster. But that's just my opinion. So, Garrett, do you agree, disagree? Think I'm crazy?
In some ways, yes. I think DeKeyser holds some value in some ways because he is a veteran presence. He's a guy that hasn't lived up to that contract. But again, I think he kind of came out of the gate, was so good offensively and was asked to do a different role and has done well in that role. But I think people expected what they saw from the beginning with his 30, 35, 40-point season. Obviously hasn't manifested anything since then. But I think there are some pieces here. I still think that that some of the guys you're saying won't get moved. I still think it'll be the guys with the no trade, the modified no trades.
Mm-hmm.
You got to kind of hope that a guy like Mike Green will have a good season. A guy like Trevor Daley will have some value because really that's where it lies for you. I think we'll see guys get moved, but seeing 5, 6, 7 guys get moved, I think that's a little unrealistic. I think you might see maybe 2 or 3 guys get moved. And maybe you might see a DeKeyser get moved if Yzerman has a long-term plan for the defense. Because after this upcoming season, after the following season, DeKeyser's the only one that's on the books for this team.
That is correct. Absolutely.
So it's this crazy notion of, do you maybe just trade him now? But at the same time, he's the only stable part of that defense that you'll have at the end of next season.
Good point. That's actually a really good point.
You're playing that middle.
I mean, that's a real good point there you bring up, and I think moving forward, I still think that you're going to have. I think what the Wings will do is they'll hang on to guys like the Mike Greens, the Trevor Dailies, and that kind of stuff until probably the trade deadline, because I think you can get more out of that at the trade deadline than you would, right now. So, and plus you need that help there. So that being the case, that's why I think like a Danny DeKeyser could go early. Same with like an Anthony Ciu, because it seems like those are the type of players that they could get rid of right now to build up for the future. Because as you mentioned, yeah, Danny DeKeyser technically right now on the books, if nothing is to change and they didn't do anything, yes, you're right. He would be the only defenseman left, but as you know, that's not going to be the case, obviously. So I just don't think DeKeyser fits in to what type of defensive player Steve Yzerman wants on this team, and that's why I think he's kind of the odd man out, if you will, at that point. 6'3", 109 pounds. I know he's been here for, his fifth year. He's a local kid. He played at Western Michigan. He played with that really good Western Michigan team that, won the CCHA. They played in the tournament, and they played well. So, yeah, I mean, I get it. But, again, he's not lived up to the hype that he had coming in, and for all intents and purposes, he's really kind of been a disappointment in my opinion. So, take it for what it's worth. But that's why I think of the players on that list, he's probably the most expendable right now. Just because you could afford right now to get rid of a player like that. But as you said, if they don't do anything on the back end, he's your best guy out there. So, anyway, that's your opening night roster, and again. Are you going to see Philip Zadina this year? Yes, you are. Are you going to see Mikael Rasmussen? Yes, you are. Are you going to see Joey Veleno? Yes, you are. You're going to see these guys. Don't get too pissed off early in the season that you're, I'm not going to buy tickets. I can't see the young guys. It's not. Trust us. You're going to see these guys. It's not going to be until probably Thanksgiving or Christmas time. And but you gotta trust the process here. I know that's a cliche thing now, but as you say, Garrett, it's part of the Yzer plan, and that's again, it leads us into our next topic here of captain, no captain. Now, there was some discussion throughout the offseason if Dylan Larkin was finally going to be the captain of this team. Has he finally reached that pinnacle of he can wear the C, the coveted C that hasn't been worn since Nicholas Lidstrom wore it? I'm sorry, Henrik Zetterberg wore it. So, who is going to be the captain? Well, currently, right now, no one's the captain. And there was rumors back and forth that maybe Justin Abdelkader, which I think is a horrible, God damn, that's a horrible idea if they gave him the captaincy. It didn't. Thank God. Is it going to be Dylan Larkin? The answer to that question is yes. It is going to be Dylan Larkin, but it may not be this year. And let me explain to you why. And Garrett and I have kind of talked about this really in depth over the last couple of weeks. There's just this thing going on in the NHL about, well, this player deserves it. This player doesn't deserve it. And, well, Connor McDavid got the C right after he came out of the womb. I'm like, well, yeah, he did. But look at Connor McDavid. What was the last time the Edmonton Oilers won anything? 2006? Connor McDavid was sucking on a pacifier. So, I think he was. And in my opinion, Garrett, they gave the captaincy too early to Connor McDavid. And the reason is because Connor McDavid, and I'm not bashing this guy at all, but it's all about Connor McDavid. The team doesn't get better with Connor McDavid there, right? They just don't. I mean, they had a good playoff rush a couple of years ago. Haven't done anything since then. Done absolutely nothing. Didn't make it last year. So do you want to rush this thing in there and give Dylan Larkin the captaincy? I don't know. My thing is you have to allow the players to become professionals. And the question is, everyone asks, well, what's a professional? How can you define it? Well, it's up to the player to define that, in my opinion. And you cannot, Garrett, again, and step in whenever you like here, but I think, these guys don't know how to be pros when you're 18 years old. It's just very difficult to do that when you've never been through it. You've never played an 80-game season before. And it's not just about you. It's about taking the team around you and other players that are your age or maybe a little bit younger than you and bringing them up and you're setting the standard. You're setting the tide for this team. And I just don't think Dylan Larkin has that experience yet. That's why he's not the captain. And then you're like, well, why isn't Abdelkader the captain? He's been here for 10 years. Well, again, it's about being a professional. Remember Mike Babcock used to say this a lot. He would always say, such and such player is a true professional. And that's why he had problems with Thomas Tatar. And I'll tell you why. Because Thomas Tatar, and nothing against Thomas, he was a young kid, a lot of money. I guess you could say he was decent looking. He probably had the hits for the ladies and that kind of stuff because I know him from some of the parties he was in here in locally in Detroit. The kid liked to drink and party. Typical 22-year-old, right? His problem with Mike Babcock here was, Garrett, was Babcock was looking for a guy that wanted to be a professional, and Thomas Tatar was more interested in being a junior-type player. And that drove Mike Babcock insane. He hated that, and he would bench him because of it. He would show up drunk to practice. Just big no-nos. That's not being a professional. I'm not saying Dylan Larkin's showing up trashed, but what I'm saying is, though, is these guys that you're seeing, especially move down to Grand Rapids at the start of the season, they're not ready to be professional athletes. They're not ready to be professional players. Yes, did they put in the time? Yes, they did. Did they put the compete in? Yes. Not saying that at all. What I'm telling you is they're not ready to be professionals. You have to think of a professional as someone, almost like it's your own business, right? You have to have a business plan. And when these coaches go to these guys and ask them, well, what's the next step for you? And they say, I don't know. That means they don't have a business plan on what they're going to do for the professional career. Well, you can't go to the coach and say, well, I'd really like to make the lineup this year. Well, how the hell are you going to do that? So without that kind of a plan, that tells me you're not a professional. And that's the kind of feeling I'm getting that they're trying to get some of these young players to do is not only do they just have to kind of eat the shit sandwich, if you will, but and that's some of the case here, especially with some of the contracts. I understand that. But, Garrett, I think it is they just don't know how to be professionals yet. And I don't know that it's something you can coach. I think it's just something you have to mature into. And once you kind of crack that threshold, that's when you're going to see a lot of these players come up and play in this roster. Now, Garrett, I'm interested to see what your take is on that because I just don't think I think that's part of the problem is these guys just don't know how to be true NHL professionals yet.
Well, and you've got a young nucleus here. Larkin's all of 23, Manta's all of 25.
There you go.
24 years old. These guys are still, less than 3 full professional seasons into their career.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense. And let's be honest here. This year, from an actual wins-loss perspective, assuming things are going to be the way that fans anticipate, probably won't turn out too great. So it probably doesn't make sense to have a captain. Dylan Larkin will be the captain.
Absolutely.
And I think that he's shown that he takes it very personal. And I think that you talk to a guy like Henrik Zetterberg, who is beloved in that locker room, a guy like Nicholas Kronwall, who is absolutely beloved. Same with Nick Lidstrom and all these other older Swedes that might have had a brief chance to play with Dylan Larkin.
Yeah.
I think those guys knew that he was going to be that heart and soul, that voice for that team.
Sure.
So it's going to happen. But I think handing that role over to to a 23-year-old kid, I think next year is when you do it. And I think that it's a philosophical thing. And I don't think Eisman would just do this whole thing for himself. I think this is partly a Blashill thing too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm not going to blame it on Blashill. I think it might be a little bit of a cop out too on that end. But I do think that Larkin is your captain. He is your leader. He is your vocal leader, and he represents the new wave of the wing and what this team will be moving forward. Everybody talks about the Joe Velenos and the Phil Stadinas of the world. They're going to be fantastic players, but Larkin's kind of the one that represents that new wave of players. And it's not the Nyquist Tatar, hey, we're going to fade out and do a rebuild thing type of era. This is, hey, we stink. We've stunk for years. This kid's actually going to be good enough to where he could take this team to a Stanley Cup or take this team to a deep playoff run and then win a Stanley Cup again. So Larkin's going to be your captain.
And I'm sorry, question. Yeah, not to interrupt you here, but the thing is here, I think you also don't want to rush guys into this. And, I think I made a comparison the other day of Patrick Kane. Patrick Kane came in the league thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. And he got pushed around his first year. And I think the Blackhawks probably would have given him the captaincy coming in earlier that year if it wasn't for Jonathan Toews. And Jonathan Toews, thank God he was there for the Blackhawks because Patrick Kane was just all over the place. I think he's really developed into one of the best players in the world, thankfully. And now he's become a professional. He's become that player I was telling you about. But, Garrett, it took him 5 or 6 years to really develop into that and get that chip.
Right.
It's not. It might be. It is a chip. It might be a chip on his shoulder. But it took him 5 or 6 years to get into that. And then once he did that, Garrett, they started winning cup after cup after cup. Right? They won 3 out of 6 years or something like that. 3 out of 7 or whatever it was. That is exactly what I'm talking about. It's like you can't rush. You can't set these guys up for failure at 26 years old and expect them to be the next best thing 5 years down the road. You're going to burn them out. They're going to be gone. They're not going to make it.
And I think that it shows, Larkin when they went to training camp and they announced that there wasn't going to be a captain and there was a hullabaloo on social media about that and there was some a little bit of not shock but a little outrage about it. The way that Larkin handled it, the way that he conveyed it to the media, it looked like he's a guy that knows, you know what, they might still think I have more to prove, but I'm just going to keep doing what I need to. And it kind of gets to that point that you talked about earlier, Don, with that we were talking about with maturity and things like that. We'll just kind of spin it over to this, being that we're already going to go down this road to begin with. I really enjoyed listening the other day in training camp and all these other preseason games to hear what these prospects have to say. Because I think that it's there's not a whole lot of opportunities for them to get exposure at this kind of level until they do make the pros.
Yep.
And, us living in a large media market, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of stuff that just kind of gets lost and that people don't care about.
Correct.
And so I thought for me, though, the one thing that was awesome was to hear a guy like Philip Zadina and Joe Veleno come out and sound like a Dylan Larkin, sound composed and sound like they understand that there's still more work to do.
Isn't that
and I think
isn't that interesting? Because see, that's what I'm talking about. And I don't mean to cut you off here, but see, you see Dylan Larkin setting that up. He's already set the path he's already set that precedent, right? That these guys know to follow in his wake that he's making to make this roster. And if they do that and they do exactly what he's been doing, there's no way they can't make this roster, right? So that's what I'm saying. Right. But again, that's the maturity side of Dylan Larkin. You don't see that with Connor McDavid. And again, I'm not ripping him. I think he's one of the best players in the world. But you don't see that with him. He's not your leader in the clubhouse at that point. Dylan Larkin's starting to be that leader in the clubhouse.
But it's partially different though too, Don, from the perspective that you've got a guy like Joe Veleno, for example, who had a fantastic season in junior last year.
Absolutely,
hyped as one of these great young prospects, one of the 6 players in Canadian Hockey League history to get the exception status, to be a 15-year-old player and having these top 3 aspirations.
Yep.
And he falls to 30th in the draft.
Yeah.
And he falls to a team that, could have used the 7.
Yeah.
And he's motivated because you know what? 27 other teams passed on him, or it's probably 26 or whatever. But, I didn't do research, and quite frankly, it would take too much time. But we'll say about 25 teams passed on.
Yep.
He could have done 2 things in his first year or his final year at Drummondville. He could have either gone out and been a hot dog and said, well, I'm going to be better than everybody else because I shouldn't have fallen 30th overall, that I was a top 5 pick. Or he could have just done his thing and see his end goal, which was to make the NHL. And he did the latter. and he had a fantastic season. He earned the right to play for Grand Rapids in the playoffs last year.
Correct.
And now he's going to have his first pro season with Grand Rapids. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he wears the letter in Grand Rapids, because I think he's wired to being a guy that understands that the end goal is more important than what you were as a junior player. And this is what I talked about off air with the maturity.
Yeah.
Philip Zadina last year is a great example with this, because Zadina came out of junior as one of the best goal scoring prospects. Oh, well, he's going to score 50 goals. He's going to do all these things in the NHL. He's going to come in right away and he's going to score 40 goals.
Sure.
He's going to win the Calder. He's going to win the Hart. He's going to do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that gets to your head. People tend to forget that these are kids.
That's right.
They're not robots out there.
That's correct.
And a lot of this stuff does go to their head. So when you heard last year that Zadina was shaken and mentally beat up from training camp and disappointed that he didn't make it, that showed me a guy who's still immature.
That's right.
Because he expected to be on that team, and he expected to get on that team because of name alone.
That's right.
But what he did was he went down to Grand Rapids. He struggled at points, but he found a way to grow his game to what the team wanted. So then when he goes to the World, he plays very well. When he comes to the preseason, he plays very well. And now he's going to have his second professional season playing with a guy, the same guy he was drafted in the same round and in the same draft with. And there's a potential that this could be your second line of the future. So I think it's very imperative that if they're going to choose a captain, it's got to be a guy who knows how to be very, very much so into the perspective of who he is as a person, and being able to pick that right guy who just gets it. And I think Larkin gets it, and I think Veleno gets it. And it's going to maybe take Zadina another year or two to get it, but when Zadina got sent down this year, you didn't hear him whining and complaining to the Detroit media like he did last year.
That's
he got
right.
sent down.
That's right.
In fact, there's a photo of him, Rasmussen, Svechnikov, Veleno, and Seider looking like they're dropping a rock album at the first practice of Grand Rapids Griffins training camp.
Yeah.
They look like they're having a fantastic time together. A year ago, you wouldn't have seen that from Zadina. A year ago, you would have seen him wallowing away in the corner.
Yep.
Sitting here, kicking his feet, saying he deserved to be there.
Yep.
Those are the things you want to see with your young team.
Right. And again, you don't want to throw these guys to the wolves because, and I said this before, just a few minutes ago, I said you can't have these guys go out and just bomb in their first 3 weeks, because there is a confidence level to this game. Let's be honest. There's a confidence level with life, guys. So there is, you can't have them just go out and just make the roster and then not score a goal for 25 games, because it's different when Valtteri Filippo does that versus when Philip Zadina does that, because Flipper's used to it. He's used to the mental grind. He's played 82 games for 13 seasons now. Let me check here. So he was drafted. I don't even know what year he was drafted. It doesn't matter. He's played for a long time. He's had those droughts. It's a lot different when a 19 and 20-year-old goes through a drought like that, and then you start to second guess yourself. So again, this is what becoming a professional is. You stick with the trade. You know exactly what to do when you're struggling. You know how to handle it. You don't go start breaking sticks and shattering glass and all that other shit that some of these guys do when they can't score any goals. That's the difference. And so I think you mentioned there's a maturity level. There's also a confidence level too that comes with being a professional, and it's just and how you handle yourself in certain situations that you'd never come across before. And this game will mess with your head, and you see it. You see it with a lot of other players.
And it's part of the reason, Don, and I hate cutting you off,
no,
but
you're fine.
I think it's also part of the reason why, I think it's also part of the reason why a guy like Mo Seider did come over here at 18 years old. Because he's very wise, he's very mature, and he's a guy who puts things in perspective, and he understood that Yzerman and company were going to give him every opportunity to succeed, and
That's
whatever
right.
opportunity they gave him was great. And so he came over here. They wanted to give him a chance to make the opening night roster, and now he's going to play first line minutes in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, that's another good one too. Schneider is a great example. He was drafted probably about 25 spots higher than even he thought he was going to be. Then he comes to the Red Wings as their number one draft pick in the 2019 draft. And you mentioned he's going to play in Grand Rapids. We weren't even sure in June after the draft if he was even going to come over to North America. And this guy said, "The hell with it. I'm going over. I'm putting everything in, and I'm going for it. So he could have went back to Germany and played, or he could have went to junior and played or whatever. But you know what? He's here now. He's actually on the Grand Rapids Griffins. I didn't think he was even going to make that roster, to be honest with you, back in June. So I think that's another positive thing. And I think that shows you right there that there's something that when Steve Yzerman interviewed this guy, or the Red Wings organization interviewed this guy before the draft, they saw some kind of maturity that they thought could supersede what he lacked skill wise. Now, I'm not saying the kid's not skilled. I am not saying that, because you saw it, Garrett, when they played the Blackhawks and what he did to Patrick Kane one on one. This kid has plenty of skill. But again, so does Connor McDavid, right? So again, it's the way he handled himself versus the way he plays on the ice. And when you put that package together, now you have yourself a dynamite player, and I think that's exactly what we have in Mo Snyder, in my opinion.
And I think that the one consistent thing that we'll see here, and I know some people might not want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be one glaring consistent that I think is not talked about between the transition from Ken Holland and Steve Yzerman is maturity and being a professional. And I think that's going to continue to be a major point of emphasis with Yzerman as GM.
That's right.
Because that's going to allow him, it's going to be the same kind of thing that was there when Holland was, making the decisions and putting together the roster. And I think it's going to translate over to several years later with Yzerman.
Yeah, and again, I think, Ken Holland takes a lot of heat for some of the bad contracts, and maybe rightfully so. But I still think that I think Ken Holland was trying to work through some of that kind of stuff. And let's face it, he did a really good job on the drafting side for us. He was a hell of a scout. That's what he used to do before he was the general manager. So he knew how to scout players, right? And that being said, Garrett, I think I still just think Ken Holland was playing through some of the bad moves that he had made, and I don't know. But having Yzerman come in, as you mentioned, that maturity factor is exactly what you're looking for, and you saw that even in Tampa Bay. He cut bait on a lot of guys, like a Vincent Lecavalier, for example, right? He kicked him to the side like yesterday's hot trash. So that's a great example of just that. So I don't know. I really like the direction they're going with the youth movement, but it's just not going to be October 5. It's going to be January 5, most likely, before you really see this youth movement. If Garrett, you may not see all 5 of them this year up here. You may not. I would I like to see it? Of course I would, but you may not. You might get 2 out of the 5 that come up, but you may not get all 5. It just depends.
No, and I think that you will see some sort of opportunity for these kids at some point, and it's a long season, and there's still 82 games for each team to play, and I think we're just gonna take it as is, and there's a lot of interesting headlines that happened this off season, Don, and I feel like the league is more wide open than it's ever been, and we'll see where the Wings fall on that spectrum.
Absolutely. Now, going into the Eastern Conference this year, now there has been some interesting off-season moves, Garrett, and we're going to kind of segue off here to kind of the Eastern Conference. We'll save the Western Conference for a little bit later on what to expect from the Western Conference, maybe next week's show. But for right now, going into the Atlantic Division where the Red Wings are at, let's kind of slowly get into what the Athletic has for, as they call it, the Bizarro meter. Look back at the Eastern Conference offseason. Now, the Eastern Conference last year in the playoffs had, I guess you could say, one of the most interesting playoff runs when you had the Carolina Hurricanes and the New York Islanders facing off in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, those are 2 teams you didn't think were going to get out of the first round, let alone play each other in the second round. And then you had a Hurricanes team that kind of pushed Boston a little bit in the Eastern Conference Finals. So a little bit of a surprise from that organization, a team that no one thought was going to beat the Capitals in the first round, right? So The Eastern Conference, yeah, it was a little different going down the wire last year. So the Boston Bruins, again, did they make any big moves in the offseason? I mean, not really. Yeah, the signing of Charlie McAvoy, you know, is it going to happen? Uh, that kind of thing with Boston. So, um, Don Sweeney, not really any big moves there in Boston, but really, is there anything he needs to do with that team, honestly? So, with other than the fact of Brad Marchand. But I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, this team is they've been there just about every year. They beat Toronto every year in the first round. It seems like they're going deep in the playoffs every year. What else can you possibly do there? And then you have a team like the Buffalo Sabres, which is an interesting one. They didn't make really any big blockbuster trades this year because they didn't have to. There was no Ryan O'Reilly or Jeff Skinner moves or anything like that. They added Marcus Johansson in free agency. They swung deals for like Colin Miller and Jimmy Vesey, who I think are going to help them a lot better. Um, they bring in a new head coach, and Ralph Kruger, who replaces Phil Housley on the bench there. So that's going to help them a little bit, I think. So I think you're going to see Buffalo kind of take a little bit of a step forward, I think, this year. Um,
Mm-hmm. My only concern there, Don, would be this Atlantic Division is better.
yeah,
I know last year it was questioned as the worst division in all of hockey.
yeah,
I will say that the division's a little bit better, but I'm not really sure that the moves that they've made put Buffalo in a position to make the playoff spot in this division. I still think that Eichel isn't the guy to really get them to where they need to be.
No, it's not. They're not there yet, but they're kind of they're probably a step ahead of the Red Wings right now, in terms of making the playoffs, I think, but they're not too much further ahead. And then you have a team like Tampa Bay, who was able to. This was really the first off season for Julian Breezeba, taking over as the general manager from Steve Yzerman, obviously, and they were able to dump Ryan Callahan's deal, I guess. They did well in the JT Miller trade, but they had to clean up some of the cap deadwood, if you will. So I think they did a pretty good job with that.
Mm-hmm.
The Braden Point thing, that deal going through there, for the Tampa Bay Lightning, nothing really. They're status quo. Let's be honest. They were really status quo at that point. The team that I think that made the most noise in this division was the Florida Panthers. And you got you added a head coach in Joe Quenneville, comes over from the Blackhawks, and then they landed a goaltender by the name of Sergei Bobrovsky, and everyone knows Big Show Bob there, right? They also added Anton Stroman and Brett Connolly. So this team on paper got a lot better. I don't know if it's enough to push them into a playoff spot. Uh, the Hockey News seems to think so, but I don't know if it's enough to get them ahead into maybe like the Toronto or Boston area in that division. I don't know if it is. I guess we'll find out. But this team got a heck of a lot better. I think they were probably the loudest team, if you will, in the offseason as in terms of the Atlantic Division. And then you have the Ottawa Senators after that. Um, they've added a bunch of ex-Leafs assistant coaches and DJ Smith as their head coach, and that kind of thing. They also traded Zach Smith for Anisimov. The Ottawa Senators picked up Ryan Callahan's long-term injured reserve charge. But apart from that, the deal for Colin White was relatively quiet for the most part. Um, you know, they kind of got you got a Zaitsev kid that can come up and play a few minutes for them. But again, this team's not really expected to compete in this division at all. Pretty much status quo for the Ottawa Senators, and plus, other than being one of the most biggest embarrassments in not only your own city but the NHL, where else can you go from there? For the Ottawa Senators in the Atlantic Division, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
the Detroit Red Wings, as we mentioned, um, time and time again. It just seems like this is the end of the Ken Holland era, the beginning of the Steve Yzerman era, and a different, as the Athletic called it, the new Jedi skills of Steve Yzerman rebuilding this roster is what you're going to see out of the Red Wings. And then rounding it out with the Toronto Maple Leafs, um, again, trading, shipping Patrick Marleau and his contract to the Hurricanes. At the and re-signing Andreas Johansson and Kapanen and that kind of stuff. And were able to pick up Cody Ceci for Zaitsev. I think it's a big pickup for the Maple Leafs because I always said they had a problem on the back end, and Cody Ceci you know, helps with that. And they also brought back David Clarkson as well. So, and then of course in the offseason they were able to get rid of Mitch, or be able to sign Mitch Marner. That is, that ended just a couple weeks ago, a 6-year, $65 million deal. I don't. I guess time will tell if that was an overpay, but I think the Leafs, even though it sounds like they kind of stayed put a little bit, I think they got a little bit better. You saw that in the preseason games when we played them; they seem to be really tough to play against. They've almost kind of taken on kind of Tampa Bay's role in a way, and I think the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think this year they finally get over the hump of the Boston Bruins, but I don't know if they get over the Tampa Bay Lightning or not. But time will tell on that. So that's your well. Of course, you have the Montreal Canadiens. I almost forgot them. The Canadiens, for the most part, again, a good try during the offseason, but nothing really materialized for them offseason wise. They got a backup in Keith Kincaid, if you want to get crazy about that. They barely missed the playoffs last year. They had a shot at making it in. They just kind of fell apart there at the end. But so Garrett, that's your Atlantic Division. Now the Hockey News has the Atlantic Division as Tampa Bay 1, Toronto 2, Boston 3, Florida is at 4. The Montreal Canadiens are 5th. Buffalo is 6th. Detroit 7th, and Ottawa 8th. I think that one's pretty much spot on. I don't, unless you want to flip Toronto and Boston, I don't think you can. To me, I think the Hockey News has that one pegged right on.
I would agree. I don't see anything out of the ordinary. Maybe Montreal gives themselves a better opportunity to maybe leapfrog Florida. I still have some questions about Florida's youth. Complementary players around some of their young guys, or some of their star players that they do have.
Yeah.
But I think that's about what I would think the roster would be, or the standings will be when it's all said and done in April in the Atlantic Division.
So now moving into the Metropolitan Division, you have the Washington Capitals. Probably one of the worst playoffs they've had in quite some time. They traded Matt Niskanen for Reto Gudas, which I thought was interesting. They signed Carl Hagelin, Richard Panik. And then you have one of the strangest stories was Evgeny Kuznetsov's testing positive for cocaine at the Worlds, and is going to find him on a brief suspension. Was it a good offseason? I don't know, but I would say it's probably there's not a whole lot you could do with that roster, I guess, for the most part. So I think they got tougher, no question about it. I don't think they're going to get pushed around as much as they were. I think the Capitals are as good as they were when they won the Cup a couple of years ago. So the next one here is an interesting team, and it's one that I just can't wrap my head around. Is the New York Rangers. They essentially won the draft lottery with Capo Caco. Well, just how they were able to fall into place. They were able to sign Panarin during the offseason. They were able to squeeze Adam Fox and lure John Davison away from Columbus to become the team's president. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. They were able to trade for Jacob Trouba, giving him a 7-year, $56 million contract. Is just, I guess that makes up for the Kevin Shattenkirk buyout. So, the New York Rangers are interesting. I just don't know if it's going to translate onto the ice this year. And then there's a team in the Philadelphia Flyers who's brought it over Alan Vigneault as their head coach. They bought out Andrew McDonald, jumped into free agency, lands Kevin Hayes, who carries a $7 million cap hit, which to me, that was baffling to me. And then, of course, they got Niskanen from the Capitals for Gudas, which I think is a bad move for them. So the Flyers are one of those teams I think that are really fringe, if you will. The Hockey News got them high. They think they're going to finish third in that division. I would be surprised at that, and we'll explain why here in a second. The New York Islanders, again, they went hard after Panarin and Bobrovsky in the offseason, but they whiffed on that. They re-signed Anders Lee. And they're kind of keeping the band together with Brock Nielsen and Jordan Eberle. I think if they stick with that, they parted ways with Leonard as their goaltender. They brought in Varlamov on a 4-year deal, and he had the same cap hit as Leonard, which he eventually got in Chicago anyway. So the Islanders, I think, are a team that are going to still be in the upper echelon of that division. I don't think they're going to take a step back. The team that I think took the
Uh-huh.
biggest step forward here, Garrett, is the New Jersey Devils because they won the draft lottery with Jack Hughes, traded for PK Subban without having to give much up for him. Then you add a Wayne Simmons at a low 1-year deal. Um, you still have Taylor Hall out there. So this team is, I think, got a lot better in terms of where they were just a year ago. And, um, are they going to be able to make up that 26 points deficit they had to missing the playoffs last year? That's the question. But it seems to me that the organization did everything they possibly could to make that team better. And they didn't get older; they got younger, with the exception, of course, of PK Subban and Wayne Simmons. But PK is there to help the back end, and Wayne Simmons is there just to protect the young youth. So there's there's no question about that. And then you have a team that went the opposite direction in the Columbus Blue Jackets, who free agency killed them, and you knew it was going to. You knew Panarin, Bobrovsky, Matt Duchene were all going to be gone. They do add Gustav Nyquist, you know, big deal, I guess, at that point. But this is a team I suspect will fall probably to the bottom of this division. And then you have a team here, Garrett, that you like, in the Pittsburgh Penguins. And for all y'all that don't know, Garrett put a little bit of dough down in Vegas in the Pittsburgh Penguins. Um, but the Penguins moved away
25 to
from
1 odds.
25 to 1. Is that what you said?
Yes.
25 to 1. Okay. To win the cup. To win the cup, by the way. Let's make that clear. You have Pittsburgh here that they got rid of Phil Kessel in a trade to the Coyotes for Alex Galchenyuk. And, then they did this just. I don't understand the signing with with Brandon Tanev. That's one I just don't get. It seems to me they're going to move on from Jack Johnson's, what it sounds like, here soon. I think they're trying to make a deal with somebody out west for that. But the Penguins, with adding Galchenyuk, and then you have Malkin, as you'd mentioned off air. You think that's a move that is going to help them perhaps take one more run here at the Cup?
I like what Galchenyuk brings to his game. I think he's an incredibly skilled player, big body, young guy who I think needs to be on a team with a lot of talent on it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I've always liked Alex Galchenyuk. I think him on a third line, maybe being a center, around a guy like maybe a Brian Rust or Nick Bugastad.
Yeah.
Hell, even maybe like Jared McCann also he could be paired with. And I think he brings that stability that Pittsburgh needs, and he comes in relatively, on a relatively cheap end of things. He's $4.9 million cap hit. He'll be 26 in the off season, so he'll be unrestricted free agent in July. I just like Galchenyuk. I think to help give the Penn center depth because where I think Pittsburgh struggled a lot in the season last year was not having Matt Cullen.
Yeah.
They didn't have that stable fourth line center. I think Galchenyuk gives them that opportunity to have that stability down the middle. And I think that really is the most underrated thing you can have in hockey.
For sure. And I think, you're right. And let's face it, you do have that veteran roster there. It's a team that knows how to win, and they just recently won a cup too. So let's be honest, it's not like it's a far-fetched conclusion here that they can't do it. I just found it interesting that you fell in love with them at 25 to 1. I was actually surprised they were that high at 25 to 1. But irregardless, the last team here that was left off was the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, the Hurricanes are an interesting team because you had the headache of the Aho deal or no deal with Montreal. And then they lost Michael Furlan, Adam Fox, and their Justin Williams to retirement. They were able to pick Ryan Dzingel. They landed Jake Gardner. with some friendly UFA deals on the offseason. They spent millions on Patrick Marleau and the buyout deal with the Maple Leafs. Kind of got your head scratching there. So one would think that the Hurricanes will probably be one of those top teams that you might want to pick if you're playing NHL 20 on the Xbox One. But I would be interested to see if they can repeat the long cup run that they had last year with this roster of kind of misfits, if you will. If they'll be able to, are they going to be able to strike lightning in a bottle again? I don't know. But if you go into the Hockey News seems to think that's the case because the Hockey News has the Washington Capitals as the Metropolitan Division winners, followed there by the said Hurricanes from Carolina. Then third, they have the Philadelphia Flyers, followed by the New York Islanders, Pittsburgh Penguins, New York Rangers, New Jersey Devils, and of course, rounding out with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, my predictions here, I move Philadelphia down to about the fifth spot. I move the Islanders up to 3, and then I move the Devils up to 4, moving Pittsburgh down to 6 at that point, kind of leaving the Rangers in the Blue Jackets there. So, Garrett, I'm interested to know, do you think the Devils did enough to move them into the 4 spot in that division, or is the Hockey News spot on with the way they have it laid out?
I think the Devils have. I'm not a huge believer in the Flyers. I still question their goaltending. I don't know if Carter Hart's the guy still. He was phenomenal for him, but I still do have questions there. I think if I had to lay it out, I actually would put the Capitals as the number one team in that division. I still think they're far and away the best team in that division. The very division, but I think that they're the number one there. Number two, I mean, I'd have to really get into the nitty gritty there. Probably put the Islanders there. Mm-hmm. 3, I'd probably put Pittsburgh, 4, New Jersey. Then I'd probably go Carolina, the Rangers, and Columbus. And it's not like that's a bad order. I mean, from 4 to 8 could swing any which way.
Yeah, I actually agree with you there.
I think for me, that's where I'm at. I think the Devils have done enough to give themselves depth up the middle. Adding Jack Hughes helps. Being able to get PK Subban's huge, and give them a veteran presence to help them kind of put things together in the future. And I'm excited to see where that goes for them.
Now, moving into the Western Conference here, we're not going to do the big breakdown like we did there. We'll do that next week. But into the Central Division, the Hockey News has the Nashville Predators winning the division and raising another banner this year in the Central Division. They followed by Colorado, the Avalanche 2, Dallas Stars 3, Winnipeg Jets 4, St. Louis Blues 5, Chicago Blackhawks 6, and Minnesota Wild 7th. Now, I'm not going to disagree with the bottom 2. I think the division's passed by the Wild and the Blackhawks for the most part. However, I'm moving the Nashville Predators down to 5th in that division. They didn't do themselves any favors in the offseason. I think the team got worse. And, yeah, you got a Matt Duchene, big freaking deal. The guy's a cancer. I don't think this team's any good. I think they've kind of overachieved the last couple years. The team to watch out for in this division is the Colorado Avalanche. I think they're going to be leaps and bounds the better team in that division. I give the Central Division to the Colorado Avalanche, followed by the Dallas Stars, Winnipeg Jets, St. Louis Blues, then the Nashville Predators, Blackhawks, and Wild. Garrett, how about you?
If I had to put something on there, I think for me, I would probably put, it's so tough. I mean, St. Louis will most likely win that division. Mm-hmm. Colorado will be right too. I think Winnipeg will still bounce back. I know that they weren't good defensively down the stretch, and Connor Hellebuck wasn't Connor Hellebuck.
Yep.
I still think they'll make the playoffs. I think they'll still be fine. If I had to say, I actually think Chicago gets back into the playoffs, and I don't even think it's close. I think Stroman to bring a full team together, I think is going to rejuvenate that team. I think Jeremy Colliton's one of the best young head coaches in the NHL. I get it. I know it's Chicago. I know people get sick of them winning. But I think Chicago has put themselves in a good situation. Corey Crawford finally seems healthy again. I know Seabrook's not maybe what he once was. Watch out for Chicago.
All right.
Is my opinion after that. I think they would probably slot in 4 or 5. You could probably say Nashville then falls maybe 4th or 5th.
Yeah.
And then I would probably say that Dallas and Minnesota round out my 6 and 7.
So in other words, Nashville, enjoy your banner raising ceremony here in a couple days because it'll be the last goddamn one you get. Your team's trash, and they have been
Pretty
trash.
much.
They have been trash forever. So, and I don't know why you people run to them. Anyway, that's a story for another day. Into the Pacific Division, which I think is one of the most intriguing divisions in the NHL. It's one that kind of gets picked over for the most part. But the Hockey News has this as the Calgary Flames 1, the Vegas Golden Knights 2, San Jose Sharks 3, the Arizona Coyotes 4, Vancouver Canucks 5, Edmonton 6, Anaheim Ducks 7, Los Angeles Kings 8. Calgary got a lot better in the offseason. So I think they're leaps and bounds better than they were last year, and they were pretty good in the regular season. Of course, they pooed the bed there in the playoffs. But Garrett, I think this one's straight up. I don't think there's anything. You maybe, depending on what the Coyotes do, if they can get a decent run put together early on in the year, they have a shot to maybe slide into the playoffs. I think they're going to come up just a little bit short. But I like them in fourth there in that division. I think this one's pretty much lined up accordingly.
I think the way that it ended last year, it was Calgary, San Jose, Vegas, Arizona, Vancouver, Anaheim, yes, Edmonton, and LA.
Yep.
I'm pretty confident that's going to be the way that the divisions line up. Maybe you could say that Edmonton might maybe contend a little bit this year, but maybe Vancouver and Edmonton, then maybe put Anaheim to 7th. I really think the top 4 is not going to be. I think you're absolutely right on Arizona. I think Kessel gives them a chance, but they need to get out to a hot start, and that group needs to kind of show that that they're going to be for real. I think there's no question there, like you said.
All right, so that rounds out your division. So now going into the playoffs. Now this is where it gets interesting for me because I don't think you're going to get 4 teams from the Atlantic Division making the playoffs this year. Now, the Hockey News says you're wrong, Don. The Florida Panthers are going to get in there as your number 4 seed. They would play the Tampa Bay Lightning. I totally disagree with that. I don't think the Panthers get in. I think you're going to have Tampa, Toronto, Boston get in because those are automatic qualifiers. I think you get a 5th team, though, from the Metropolitan Division. And no, it's not going to be the Philadelphia Flyers. I have the New Jersey Devils taking that spot. But perhaps, Garrett, you could either have the Flyers or you may even have the New York Rangers that could slide into that 5th playoff spot that would perhaps knock out the Florida Panthers depending on how they think they've done in the offseason. So
I think that,
even the Pittsburgh Penguins there. And it's one of those things where I think you have 3 or 4 teams there with the Rangers, Penguins, Panthers, and Devils. I think are all really going to battle it out for those last 2 playoff spots. And I think based on what the Penguins and the Devils have done, I think it's enough to knock the Flyers out, maybe even knock the Panthers out. And that's just my opinion in the Eastern Conference.
I think when I'm looking at the standings, I think the top 3 in the Atlantic is going to be the same. Been the same for the last couple of years. I don't really think we have to worry too much about that. My biggest question is, can Toronto finally get over that mental hurdle? Personally, I think they can. I think Boston, this might be the year that Boston is vulnerable because I don't know how much longer they can keep it up.
Yep, I'm with you.
I do think though that Montreal might be the one that contends for a playoff spot more than Florida. I don't think Florida has the right mixture of players around Huberdeau and Barkov and Ekblad and Bobrovsky to really make this thing work.
It's all going to come down
as much as I want to believe in Florida, I don't think that Florida is really going to be all that special this year. I really don't.
I think it's going to come down to if Carey Price can carry the Canadians. He's going to have to carry them down the stretch, and he wasn't able to do that last year. He was close, but he wasn't able to do that last year. So I think that's really where
I really do legitimately believe. I mean, I also believe that a guy like Jeff Barry is going to take a significant step for them this year. I don't believe Cole Caulfield's with their camp. I know he's not, but I mean, Nick Suzuki is going to be a guy down the middle too that's going to play really well for him. And he's a guy who you should watch out for if you're in Vegas and trying to put money down on guys who can win the Calder Trophy. Nick Suzuki might be the guy to tab for that. I think Montreal might be the closest in the 4th team in the Atlantic to come close. I think Eastern Conference playoffs, I'd go with Washington. I'd go with the Islanders. Maybe not as a 2 seed, but I would go with that Pittsburgh. I'm going to go with, and I'm going to go out on a limb here.
Ooh.
I'm going to say both New York teams make it to the playoffs here. I think that the New Jersey Devils and the Rangers both make the playoffs in the Metropolitan Division. I think Carolina's goaltending issues could catch up to them, and I'm a little worried that they gave up Justin Falk and that might mess with them at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what that might happen to them, or what might be a significant loss for them there, Don. So I would probably put New Jersey and the Rangers in the playoffs at that point. Again, I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot. I don't think they're going to go far, but I think it's the fact that 3 teams from the New York area are going to be in the playoffs. It would just be madness.
Yeah, that's going to send it into a tizzy over there. There's no question about it. Yeah, I still think the Eastern Conference this year is Tampa Bay's to lose. I personally like them to go all the way to the Stanley Cup Final this year. I think this is their shot. They've been kind of skipped over, if you will, or just didn't. It just didn't work out for them the last couple of years in the playoffs. I think they're very similar, Garrett, to the LA Dodgers or the Tampa Bay Lightning here. This is kind of like their last good shot here before they have to either make some decisions with this team. So I really think Tampa Bay moves on to the Stanley Cup Finals from the Eastern Conference. Now, over in the Western Conference is interesting because the Hockey News is high on the Vegas Knights. In fact, they have them going all the way to the Cup Final, losing to Tampa Bay. I'm not so sure they get out of the first round at this point, but I like a team in Calgary. The team that I really like, and I said this before, is the Colorado Avalanche. I think the Colorado Avalanche are the team that's going to win the Western Conference and take on Tampa Bay in the Stanley Cup Final.
I can't disagree with that. I still think Winnipeg could be a team to watch out for because I think they have that sour taste in their mouth. I think everybody was essentially putting the way that we're talking about Colorado this year is the way that everybody was talking about Winnipeg last year.
Good point. Yeah, valid.
That water could even out to be a point where you might see Winnipeg kind of play a little bit above their level, but still play at a realistic level. So I still think as long as you've got Patrick Laine, Kyle Connor, and Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler on your team, it really doesn't matter who's on the back end. Those guys are just generational players.
Oh, for sure. No question about that. I
think you're right in general, though, about Colorado.
So now you told me you had a surprise as for what team you thought was going to be a surprise for us. Now I think maybe you already gave it away, but I want to make sure you're going to be like the Migos here and walk it and talk it. So, Garrett, who is that team that you said was going to be your pick to click this year?
So basically the Pacific Division is going to end up similar, or the Central is going to end up same way. I think my one team is Chicago. Ooh. It is. In fact, I really think Chicago has enough this year to get back to the conference final. Corey Crawford is healthy, man. DeBrincat is a stud. Dylan Strome is playing like the third overall pick that we thought he'd be. Brendan Perlini's a nice complimentary player for them. Who knows? Adam Boqvist might get healthy for them. Kirby Dach might get healthy for them. Chicago's got it made, man. And as long as they have Taves and Kane on that roster, I don't care what else you really think about Chicago. I hate their guts too. Dude, they're gonna perform.
So you're telling me a team with a depth chart on defense: Duncan Keith, Eric Gustafsson, Kelvin DeHaan, Ole Mata, Brent Seabrook, Connor Murphy, Adam Boqvist, Carl Dahlstrom, and Lucas Carlson. You're telling me that's going to be your pick to click?
I like Calvin DeHaan. And I like Ole Mata. And I think those are fair parts from other organizations that come to the team that won, that knows how to win, and very well could have a good year. I'm not saying that they're going to light the lamp on fire, but I do think that actually makes Chicago's defense look a lot more stable than it did last year.
Well, defensively last year, they were 30th in the league with 3.55 goals against average. They did offensively, they were the 8th best team in the league. So I'll give them that. Their power play, 15th in the league, 20.2%. However, Garrett, this was the problem they had last year. Their penalty kill was dead last in the NHL, 31st at 72.7. So, defensively and PK is what's going to have to drastically improve for them to make to be that team that's going to pick the click, if you will. And I think you know what though, hats off to you for doing that. Because I think they do have the team that could do it. To believe it or not, I actually do kind of agree with you on that point. Because based on that, they finished with 84 points last year. I think they missed out by about 15 points in the playoff run or something like that. But they had a good push though at the end of the year. So
just consider the fact that Chicago was at one point a worse record than Detroit was in the middle part of the season.
Yeah.
And they kind of climbed back into being respectable once DeBrincat and Strome
That's right.
kind of came into that of being a tandem. And I think that is really something that they're going to look at wholeheartedly if you're Stan Bowman.
Yeah, and I think the Hockey News agrees with you because they said that Dahan and Mata helped close the gap on the ice and kind of help bridge their defense with Keith and Seabrook as mainstays. So I think you may have something here. You may have pulled the rabbit out of the hat here. This might be your Valtteri Filppula right here. So I got to give it to you.
Hope so. I should have maybe could have picked.
But you know what though?
I should have picked Black.
But the problem is your picks have been like the Madden cover curse though. So, but that's okay. You can only go up from here.
Absolutely.
So that being said, Garrett, that's we've already been going for an hour and a half here. I'm sure people are tired; they need to go to bed. But again, the Walk It, Talk It, Migos, Pick to Click. Dr. Garrett Kaloje goes with the Chicago Blackhawks. His Pick to Click during this upcoming season. Garrett, some parting words. Again, the youth movement's coming for the Red Wings. It's just not going to be October 5th. So just everyone pump the brakes. But it's coming. You're going to see these guys play this year. But you're not going to see them on opening night against the Dallas Stars either. So unless someone gets hurt.
I think my party.
Yeah. Yep.
I think my party words down would be to enjoy the season. It's going to be a long one. There's going to be a lot of going on. There's going to be a lot of ups, a lot of downs for whoever you support. Appreciate the youth movement in the NHL with all these great young players that seem to be coming into this league and performing at a higher level each and every year. And as always, Don, trust the Yzer plan.
Yeah. There's no question. This team is finally moving in the right direction. Now, I don't think they're going to go to J-Rock and win right away. But winning's right around the corner. And so, believe in the Yzer plan. Trust the process. This team's going in the right direction. So, that being said, Garrett and I are going to do this again next week. We'll drop another pod for you guys there on Facebook if you want to watch it on there. We are trying to work on figuring out how the hell we can do an actual podcast and get it to upload properly without having to spend billions of dollars because we don't have any sponsorships to help us get that far yet. But we're getting there. So until then, wait for the pods to drop on Facebook. They'll be free. Download it. We hope you listen. We hope you enjoy. They're not going to be 90 minutes long every week. We're going to try to keep it to an hour, but this week, opening week, we're excited. Everyone's excited. So hockey is back. So for Don Tottingham, Dr. Derek Kaloje, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week. Enjoy the opening puck drop on the 2019-2020 NHL season of Raising the Banner.
Woo.